Here we will see questions regarding strengthening, weakening or flaw. So again, first thing will be getting the argument or the conclusion correct. Okay, everything is decided by this. So one more thing we need to see here, that is getting the reasoning or cause and effect relationship. Okay, this argument or the conclusion, what is the reasoning behind this argument? That's also what we need to consider, because in a lot of weakening and flaw kind of questions, the option will target the reasoning sometime. Okay, especially in flaw kind of questions, that the reasoning is flawed. Okay. Let's see. Because dinosaurs were reptiles, scientists one assumed that all reptiles alive today, dinosaurs, were cold-blooded. The recent discovery of dinosaurs fossils in northern Arctic, however, has led a number of researchers to conclude that at least some dinosaurs might have been warm-blooded. Okay, that only warm-blooded animals could have withstood the frigid temperatures of Arctic winters, whereas cold-blooded animals would have frozen to death in the extreme cold. So here the conclusion is that some dinosaurs were warm-blooded, and the reason is because we found some fossils in the Arctic region, which is like complete snow. Okay, so only warm-blooded animals could have stayed in Arctic. That's the reasoning. So the conclusion is some of the dinosaurs should have been warm-blooded animals, because we found their fossils in the Arctic region. So we need to weaken the argument. Okay, something that will target the reasoning or the conclusion, whatever we need to see. Mostly it will target the reasoning, that fossils being found in the Arctic region doesn't mean that they need to be only warm-blooded animals. There could be some other reasoning also why we found the fossils there. Let's see. Today's reptiles are generally confined to regions of temperate or even tropical climates. So this actually says that reptiles today are found mostly in temperate or tropical climates. I mean, they're not found in areas like Arctic. So it doesn't tell me anything about the fossils being found in Arctic. I mean of dinosaurs or of animals found in ancient times. Fossils show the Arctic dinosaurs to have been substantially smaller than the other known species of dinosaurs. We're not talking about size. Size doesn't tell me whether they are cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Third, Arctic dinosaur fossils were found alongside fossils of plants known for their ability to withstand extremely cold temperature. So what they're saying is, I mean, if at all it means anything, is that the fossils that were found, they were alongside the plants which could withstand very low temperature. That means those fossils would also be able to withstand, I mean, the animals. So it actually supports. Okay, if an animal can withstand really cold temperature, that means it must be warm-blooded. So it actually supports the argument. The number of fossils found together indicates herds of dinosaurs so large that they would need to migrate to find a continual food supply. So it says that the fossils that we found in the Arctic, okay, fossils of dinosaurs, doesn't mean they stayed there. Maybe they strayed from some other part. Okay, they came there in search of food and they died. Okay, so it doesn't mean they stayed there. They were inhabitants of that place, and we can't conclude that they were warm-blooded animals. This is the right answer. Experts on prehistoric climate conditions believe that winter temperatures in the prehistoric were not significantly different from what they are today. This actually contradicts the whole passage, because the author itself says that we're talking about northern Arctic where temperatures are so frigid. So This is out of context simply. Okay, we cannot contradict the paragraph itself. We can only contradict the reasoning. Reasoning as in this reason leads to this conclusion. We can only target that thing. There is relatively little room for growth in the overall carpet market, which is tied to the size of the population. Okay, so the market is not going to expand. Most who purchase carpet do so only once or twice, first in their 20s, then in their 50s or 60s. So it again expands on the same argument that the market is not going to increase. Thus, as the population ages, companies producing carpet will be able to gain market share only through purchasing competitors and not through marketing. So the argument here is because the market is not expanding, market is stagnated. Okay, it's a stagnant market. So to increase market share, marketing activities won't work, and only purchasing other companies like competitors will only increase the market share. That's the conclusion, and that's the reason that the market is stagnated. So which of the following, if true, casts the most doubt on the conclusion above? Conclusion is that market share will not increase, or only marketing will increase. Okay, let's see. 2 of the 3 mergers in the industry's last 10 years led to a decline in profits and revenue for the newly merged companies. Now this is a trap option. It tries to connect increase or decrease in revenues to that of market share. Market share is, let's say I sell 100 and the total market share is of 400. So my share in that market is 25%. That is market share. Now if next year, let's say I sell 150, can I say anything about what my market share would be next year? No, because I need to know what is total. Maybe total is still 400, so my market share would increase. Maybe total has gone up by, let's say total has become 1000. So in that case, despite the increase in revenues, my market share has gone down. So decline in profits or revenues is nowhere an indicator of market share. Remove it. Most of the major carpet producers market other floor coverings as well, clearly out of context, because we are any which we're talking about carpet market share, okay, not other floor coverings market. Most established carpet producers market several different brand names and varieties, and there is no remaining niche in the market for new brands to fill. That means even if we do marketing activities, okay, there is no remaining niche in the market for new brands to fill. I mean, new brands or new marketing activities are not going to fulfill any purpose. So this is actually supporting the argument. Out. Price reductions achieved by cost cutting in production by some of the dominant firms in the capital market are causing other producers to leave the market altogether. So what it means is, let's say if I reduced price, let's say earlier there were 4 players, let's say everybody has 25% market share. Okay, so 1 or 2 companies, they achieved price reductions by cost cutting. So it forced some of the players to leave the market. Let's say 2 of the players couldn't survive and they left the market. That means the remaining 2 would cater to the whole of the market. Let's say their market share becomes 50%. So the market share increased, okay, by what? By price reductions. Price reduction is a marketing activity. Okay, I mean, who decides the price? The marketing department decides the price. So if price is reduced, it will be done by the marketing department. So marketing department or marketing activities are leading to increase in market share. That is contradicting what is given there, because what was given there is market share or marketing activities will not increase the market share, only by buying out other companies would increase it. But it says marketing activities can also increase marketing or market share. Carpet market is unlike most markets in that consumers are becoming increasingly resistant to new patterns and styles. So coming forth with new patterns and new products is also marketing activities. So it says consumers are becoming resistant. That means marketing is not going to help. This is actually supporting the argument. People who moved from one state to another when they retired, the percentage who retired to Florida has decreased by 3 percentage points over the past 10 years. So let's say out of total people who migrate after retirement, 20% used to migrate earlier, and this year it is 17%. After 10 years it's 17%. Okay, so 10 years back 20% used to move to Florida, and let's say after 10 years 17% are moving to Florida. Since many local businesses cater to retirees, these declines are likely to have a negative effect on these businesses and the economy of Florida. So the argument here is because percentage of people who retire, percentage of retirees who move to other states, it has gone down. So it will decrease, or it will have a negative impact on the businesses there. That is the argument. So in most of these kind of questions, we have already seen that where we are talking about market share. Market share is also a percentage, like 25% market share, 50% market share. Here we are talking about percentage. Now let's say 10 years back 100 people were there, 100 retirees used to move to other states. So 20% of them, that means 20 of them used to move to Florida. Now let's say after 10 years that 100 becomes 1000. Okay, so right now there are 1000 people who move after retirement. 17% of them, that means 170 move to Florida. Okay, so despite a decrease in percentage, actual numbers are going up. Okay, so percentage decrease cannot lead or cannot conclude that absolute number is decreasing. Okay, it all depends on the total number. So even if the percentage has decreased, total number have gone up, so the businesses will only increase. Okay, right? So if you see third option, number of people who moved from one state to another when they retired has increased significantly. So from 100, let's say it becomes 1000. So that's the right argument. Okay, if we see other arguments, people who moved from one state to another when they retired moved a greater distance on average last year than such people. It doesn't matter whether they moved greater distance or smaller distance. We're talking about percentage decrease who moved to Florida, but we cannot say whether the absolute number increased or decreased. People were more likely to retire to North Carolina from another state last year. Again, the numbers are given that it had decreased by 3 percentage points. Whether more numbers are moving to North Carolina or something, I don't care. I don't need that. This is what I need out. Number of people who left Florida when they retired to live in another state was greater last year than it was 10 years ago. Now, see, we cannot change the facts. Fact remains same. If we stick to the fact, we can easily remove the other 4 options. The fact is, the number of people who moved to Florida after retirement, that decreased by 3 percentage points. Whether it is, more or less, the 3% doesn't change. Okay, and this doesn't tell me whether the absolute number has increased or decreased out. Okay, it actually supports the argument, this fourth one. It says number of people who left Florida, so moved out of Florida is more. So it actually supports the argument. Florida attracts more people who move from one state to another when they retire than does any other state. Maybe, but still it's a 3 percentage point decrease. We cannot change that out. In the past, most children who went sledding in the winter snow in Verland used wooden sleds with runners and steering bars. 10 years ago, smooth plastic sleds become popular. They go faster but are harder to steer or slow. The concern that plastic sleds are more dangerous is clearly borne out by the fact that number of children injured while sledding was much higher last winter than it was 10 years ago. Which the following, if true, most seriously undermine the force of the evidence cited. So plastic sleds are dangerous. That's what they're saying, that's what they're concluding, because number of children injured while sledding which was much higher last winter. So number of children getting injured while sledding is much higher than it was 10 years ago. Okay, and because plastic sleds are becoming more popular, so they are arguing that this increase in number of children getting injured while sledding is because of that plastic sleds. Let's see. A few children still use traditional wooden sleds. I mean, out of context. Okay, it doesn't weaken this argument, it doesn't target this argument. Right? The argument is because more children are using plastic sleds, the number has gone up who are getting injured, so they're dangerous. It doesn't target that. Okay, a few children are still using it, that's fine. Okay, but majority of them are still using plastic sleds. Very few children wear any kind of protective gear such as helmets while sledding. Now, the comparison between number of children getting injured now and number of children getting injured 10 years back, it doesn't target that out. Plastic sleds can be used in a much wider variety of snow conditions than wooden sleds can. Now, this says that earlier, let's say, wooden sleds could be used, let's say, only for one or two occasions. Okay, one or two conditions. It says plastic sleds can be used, let's say, for more occasions, let's say 8 to 10 occasions, just some numbers. Okay, that means the instances of plastic sleds getting used is increased substantially. Okay, the instances where plastic sleds are used have increased substantially. So let's say earlier total 100 people were using it for one sport. Okay, right now let's say 100 people are using it for 10 sports. Okay, so there are 1000 instances now compared with 100 instances. So let's say out of 100 instances 10 were injured. Let's say out of 1000 50 were injured. Still 10 out of 100 is like 10% getting injured. 50 out of 1000 is like 5% getting injured. So more people are getting injured, but as a percentage of total it's lesser. Okay, so that means we can conclude that by using plastic sleds the percentage of people getting injured has actually gone down. That's your answer. Okay, next option, most sledding injuries occur when a sled collides with a tree, rock or another sled. Again, it doesn't tell me the difference between plastic and wooden, because the traditional wood sled can carry more than one rider. An accident involving a wooden sled can result in several children being injured. So this is actually supporting the argument. If you see, it says it's more likely that wooden sled will injure more people, okay, as compared to plastic. But still people using plastic sleds are getting injured. That means plastic sled is bad. It's actually supporting the argument. 12 years ago and again 5 years ago, there were extended periods when Darfur Republic's currency, the Pundra, was weak. Its value was unusually low relative to the world's most stable currencies. Both times a weak Pundra made Darfur's manufactured products a bargain in the world markets. Therefore, exports were up substantially. And some politicians are saying in order to cause another similarly sized increase in exports, government should allow the Pundra to become weak again. So the argument here is we should weaken the currency so that exports can be increased. That's the argument made by the politician. So which is the following, if true, provides the government with the strongest ground to doubt the politician's recommend. Okay, so again we need to weaken the argument. Let's see, several of the politicians now recommending that the Pundra be allowed to become weak made the same recommendation before each of the last two periods of the currency weakness. This actually supports the argument that earlier also they made this argument, so and it actually went up exports. So this time also it's likely to went up. So this is out. After several decades of operating well below its peak capacity, Darfur's manufacturing sector is now operating at its near peak levels. So what it means is that we are producing as much as we can. Okay, so if we even weaken our currency, we cannot produce substantially more. We cannot produce, we cannot make more. That means we cannot export more. We are already producing as much as we can. Okay, let's say we are producing 98 units. Okay, near peak capacity, not 100%. So let's say after weakening the currency, we can make 100, which is like a very minimal increase. So it will not increase the exports substantially. Okay, because we cannot produce more. How can we sell more? Okay, we can only sell more if we produce more. So this will weaken the argument that even after weakening the currency, exports are not going to increase because we don't have the capacity to produce more. Economy of a country experiencing a rise in exports will become healthier only if the currency is strong. So it is talking about increase in exports making the economy healthier. That's not even the argument. Okay, we are simply correlating weakening of the argument with exports increase. That's it. Whether the economy becomes healthy or not, that's not a concern. Those countries whose manufactured products compete with Darfur's on the world market currently have all stable currencies. Again, I mean that actually supports the argument that if we weaken it, our exports will become more tempting. Okay, it'll become cheaper. So will increase our exports. So this actually supports the argument. While other countries who are competing with this country, their currencies are stable, so they'll not be more attractive. We'll become more attractive by decreasing our or weakening our currency. Sharp improvement in the efficiency would make Darfur's product a bargain in the world markets. Okay, so this again is a very tempting option. What it says is that by increasing the efficiency of the production plants, we can make the products cheaper. Okay, but it doesn't say that weakening the currency will not increase the exports. It says there could be other ways to increase the exports to make the products more attractive, but it doesn't tell me that this is not a way to increase exports. It doesn't target this. That's also out. So Kernland imposes a high tariff on export of unprocessed cashew nuts in order to ensure that nuts are sold to domestic plants. Okay, so people are not able to export because there are high tariffs. So if we export, the price would be more and people won't buy. So they have to sell it to the domestic plants. If the tariffs were lifted and unprocessed cashew was sold at world market prices, more farmers could profit by growing cashews. Okay, so if we remove the tariffs, so we could sell the raw cashews at the world market prices, which are supposedly higher because more farmers could profit by growing cashews. So that's the only assumption we can make here. However, since all the processing plants are in urban areas, removing the tariffs would seriously hamper the government's efforts to reduce urban employment over the next 5 years. With the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument. So argument here is, if we remove the tariffs, it will help the farmers, but it will harm the urban employment. Okay, so that's the argument here, because farmers will get more profit, so it will help them, but in the urban areas where processing plants are there, they'll not get cashews at a good price, so they'll go out of job. That's the argument. Let's see. Some of the byproducts of processing cashews are used for manufacturing paints and plastics. So this in first look looks like it's irrelevant. Even if it is relevant, it will actually support the argument, which is that byproducts of processing cashews. So all the urban manufacturing, all the urban processing plants which are processing cashews, their byproducts are used for other products also. So they will actually get benefit by processing, more cashews. So it actually supports the argument. Other countries in which cashews are processed subsidize their processing plants. So again, this has nothing to do with other countries. Okay, it only concerns with how removing tariffs harms or doesn't harm the urban employment. Okay. More people in Kernland are engaged in farming cashews than in processing them. So even if lesser people are involved in processing them, still it doesn't say whether doesn't target this argument that removing tariffs harm urban employment. Okay, it doesn't tell me that it will not harm it. Still, maybe fewer people, but it will still harm them. Buying unprocessed cashews at lower than world market prices enables cashew processors in Kernland to sell processed nuts at competitive pricing. Actually supports the argument. It says, the processing plants, they buy cashews at lower than world market prices. That means they buy it at lower prices at home. Okay, domestic production. If they go to the world market to buy, they'll have to buy at higher prices. So from domestic production, they get it cheaper and they sell the processed nuts at competitive prices outside. So it actually supports the argument. A lack of profitable crops is driving an increasing number of small farmers in Kernland of the land and into the cities. So what it says is, because farming is not very attractive, people are moving to cities in search of jobs, obviously. So now if we remove tariffs, farmers would be helped. That means farmers are moving out because of lack of profitable crops. So if the profitability increases of crops, the people will stay in the villages for farming. They'll not move to cities, and if they don't move to cities, there'll be less unemployment in the cities. So it will actually help the urban people, because there'll be low competition for the jobs there. Okay? So the unemployment might actually decrease because of this, because of the urban unemployment, because people don't even need to move to the cities in that case. So that will not increase the unemployment, it will actually decrease the unemployment. That's your answer. Guidebook writer, I've visited hotels throughout the country and have noticed that in those built before 1930, the quality of the original carpentry work is generally superior to that in hotels built afterwards. Okay. Clearly, carpenters working in hotels before 1930 worked with more care, skill and effort than the carpenters after 1930. So which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument? Okay. So the argument here is, the reasoning is, the carpentry in hotels before 1930 is better than the ones after 1930. So because of this finding, I'm concluding that carpenters were better in hotels, before 1930. They worked with more skill and more care. Okay. The quality of original carpentry in hotels is generally far superior to the quality of original carpentry in other structures. We are not comparing hotels with another structures. Hotels built since 1930 can generally accommodate more guests. So accommodating more guests is a matter of size and space of the hotels. Okay, it's not about the quality of carpentry. Materials available to carpenters working before 1930 were not significantly different in quality from the materials available to the carpenters after 1930. So it actually supports the argument. How? So the tools and the stuff available to the carpenters before was same as that of what is available after 1930. That means they were working with similar capacity and similar skills, okay, and similar care. Actually supports the argument. better the quality of original carpentry in a building, the less likely that building is to fall into disuse and be demolished. Let's park it, this option, the fourth option, aside for a second. Let's say fifth option, the average length of apprenticeship for carpenters has declined significantly since 1930. Again, this supports the argument because less apprenticeship can lead to less skills after 1930. So it actually supports it. Coming back to the fourth D option again, it says the better the quality of the original carpentry in a building, the less likely the building is to fall into disuse. So let's say I visited hotels before 1930, and I mean in general all of them have better carpentry. That's what I've found. Okay. Now imagine there was a scenario that there were, let's say, 100 hotels built before 1930. 70 of them fall into disuse. Okay, and they had inferior carpentry. Okay, and 30 remaining which had better carpentry are still in use. So that means when I visit the hotels built before 1930 right now, I can only find those hotels which have better carpentry. So I'll get that indication that in general hotels built before 1930 had better carpentry. Now imagine a case when all the hotels were in use, so majority of them would have inferior carpentry if I'm able to visit them. So I'll not be able to conclude that hotels built before 1930 have better carpentry. That's what it says. Better the carpentry, less likely the building is to fall into disuse. So that means the hotels that are still in use, most of them have better carpentry. That's why I'm getting to that conclusion. So there were majority of hotels, or there could be majority of hotels which did not have better quality of carpentry and they fall into disuse. So I'm not able to see them. That's why my finding is misguided. That's my answer. The spacing of 4 holes in a fragment of bone flute excavated at the Neanderthal campsite is just what is required to play the 3rd through 6th note of a diatonic scale, the 7-note musical scale used in much of Western music since the Renaissance. So that means in a diatonic scale there are 7 scales: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the fragment of the bone flute, it is what is required to play from 3rd till 6th, 4 notes. Okay, so it was a fragment. So maybe it could support other notes also, but I don't know. Okay, so the 7-note musical scale is used right now in Western musical Renaissance. Okay, so right now we have 7-note diatonic scale. Musicologists therefore hypothesize that diatonic musical scale was developed and used thousands of years before it was adopted by Western musicians. So the hypothesis is, just because a 4-note, a fragment of a bone flute which could play 4 notes, similar to that of a diatonic 7-note musical scales that are used. So clearly Neanderthals existed thousands of years before. So what they are hypothesizing, that the diatonic 7-note musical scales used today were actually developed thousands of years ago. So what we need to see is whether this bone flute that could play 4 notes, whether it was able to play all 7 notes. So if it could play all the 7 notes, it was a fragment that could play 4 notes. If the whole length of the bone flute could play all 7 notes, okay, then it will actually support the hypothesis, if you can figure that out. Okay. Now if you see option 5, okay, I'm jumping straight to the right answer. We'll see the other 4 options also. The cave bear leg bone used to make the Neanderthal flute would have been long enough to make a flute capable of playing a complete diatonic scale. So what it means is this fragment, okay, was coming from an actual size which was large enough to play all the 7 notes. So it actually supports that the bone flute could have been playing a 7 note diatonic tone at that time, thousands of years ago. Let's see other options. Bone flutes were probably the only musical instrument made by the Neanderthals. Now, does it tell me anything whether they can play 7 note or not? No. No musical instrument that is known to have used a diatonic scale is of an earlier date than the flute found at the Neanderthal campsite. It tells me, or it says, that before the fragment of the bone flute was found, there couldn't have been any other musical instrument which could play a diatonic scale. Does it tell me whether that particular bone flute could play 7 note or not? It tells me there is nothing before that that could play. It doesn't tell me whether that particular bone flute could play a 7 note or not. The flute was made from a cave bear bone, and the campsite at which flute fragment was excavated was in a cave that also contained skeletal remains of the cave bears. That means, the cave bears were staying with the human species, which is Neanderthals. That's the only conclusion we can make out of this statement, this option. Again, it doesn't tell me whether it can play a 7 note tone or not. Flutes are the simplest wind instrument that can be constructed to allow playing a diatonic scale. It talks about flutes in general. We are talking about that particular bone flute. Whether that bone flute can play it or not, it doesn't tell me that. Restaurant manager, in response to requests from our patrons for vegetarian main dishes, we recently introduced 3, 1, 2 and 3, these 3 dishes. The first 2 are frequently ordered, but no one orders the potato dish, the third one, although it costs less than the other 2. Clearly, then our patrons prefer not to eat potatoes. So what it says is, patrons wished for vegetarian dishes, so we introduced 3 dishes. 2 of them are sold well. The third one is not ordered, despite having low price. So they are arriving at the conclusion that nobody likes potato. Okay, that's what they're concluding. So which of the following could be an error of reasoning? Now all the options here are like abstract. Okay, now in most of the weakening argument questions, so there is a cause and effect relationship. Okay, and what will weaken the argument? Mostly the argument says that the cause that is represented there is not the only cause. There could be other causes as well to produce the same effect. Okay, that's why we cannot conclude that this cause will certainly lead to that effect. If you see option 5, treating one of the several plausible explanations as the only possible explanation. Okay, treating this cause as the only cause. There could be other causes as well. For example, the price is low, maybe they perceive it to be of low quality, that's why they're not ordering it. Okay, or they don't even know what potato is. Okay, so there is no question of not liking potatoes. There could be several reasons. I don't know. We cannot assume that's the right option. Let's see other 4 options. Concluding that 2 things that occur at the same time have a common cause. There are not 2 things happening here. There is just one event happening. This. Drawing a conclusion that is inconsistent with one premise of the argument. There is no inconsistency. Okay. Ignoring possible differences between what people say they want and what they actually choose. Now, it's not that they wished for vegetarian and that they ended up ordering non-veg. No, They wished for vegetarian, they're still ordering for vegetarian. Out of three vegetarian, they're ordering two. That's not what is happening. Attempt to prove a claim on the basis of evidence that a number of people hold the claim to be true. So it's not like a lot of people are saying that this is true, this is true, this is true. Okay, we are just there are just some instances happening as to which dish is being ordered. Based on that, we are arriving at a conclusion. Okay, it's not that 10 people are claiming something to be true. The violent crime rate, number of violent crimes per 1,000 residents in Meadowbrook is 60% higher now than it was 4 years ago. So in Meadowbrook, the rate went up by 60%. In Parkdale, this rate went up by just 10%. Okay, so these figures support the conclusion that residents of Meadowbrook are more likely to become victims of violent crime. Again, if you see, this again talks about percentages. So the rate went up by 60%, the rate went up by 10%. Now, does it tell me anything about the actual numbers? Maybe it was 10 earlier and then it went up by 60%, so it becomes 16. Maybe it was 100 earlier and it went up by 10%, so it became 110. Still, this is more violent. 1110 is more violent than 16. So we don't know the actual numbers. Okay. So if you see option 4, the violent crime rates in Meadowbrook and Parkdale 4 years ago, this is something that it fails to take into account. That's why it's saying that 60% increase will lead to more crime rate. Okay, or they're more prone to become victims of violent crime. We don't know what were the violent crimes rates 4 years ago, whether it was 10, 100 or 110, we don't know. That's the right answer. If you see first change in population density of both Parkdale and Meadowbrook of the past 4 years, it's not about population density, because we are talking about crime rate per 1,000. Okay, so it already takes into account the population of the two cities. Okay, it actually takes care of that thing. The rate of population growth in the Meadowbrook over the past 4 years compares. Again, we're talking about per 1,000 residents. Okay, so if the population has increased, that would be counted in that already, right? Because it will be total crimes upon how many thousand population is there. So it already takes into account what population increase or decrease has happened. The ratio of violent to non-violent, we are not talking about non-violent. Okay, this is out of context. How Meadowbrook's expenditures of the crime prevention over the past 4 years compare. So we are not talking about whether we have funds or not, or how much funds we are spending on policing and law and order situation. A controversial program rewards prison inmates who behave particularly well in prison by giving them a chance to receive free cosmetic plastic surgery performed by students. Okay, so this gives chance to perform a surgery on inmates who behave particularly well. Okay, the program is obviously morally questionable. Okay, because both an assumption that what about inmates want and uses the prisoner population to train surgeons. Okay, putting these moral issues aside, however, the surgery clearly has a powerful rehabilitative effect. How? As is shown by the fact that among the recipients of the surgery, the proportion who are convicted of new crimes committed after release is only half of that for the prison population as a whole. So, overall prison population going out and committing crimes again versus the people who had this surgery going out and committing crime, they are half as likely as overall prisoners getting out and committing crime. Okay, so they are half as likely to commit crime, people who had undergone surgery. So they're saying because of this, the surgery has positive impact. Okay, this program has a positive impact. So what is the flaw in the reasoning of the passage? Allows moral issues to be a consideration in presenting evidence about matters of a fact. No, it's not about, they're already saying, putting the moral issues aside, they're talking about pure numbers. Okay, so they're putting out the facts. This is out, this is not the flaw. Dismisses moral consideration on the ground that only matters of the fact are relevant. They've already said that thing. Okay, morally it could be wrong, but just on the basis of facts it's right. Okay, so they're not saying that the moral issues don't count. They're saying if we consider only facts, then these are the facts. Okay, they did not dismiss the moral considerations altogether. Okay, just by saying putting moral issues aside, so what they're emphasizing is, other than moral issues, these are the facts, and these facts suggest this. Okay, so what we need is, the facts don't lead to this conclusion. That's what we need to show. Not saying that there could be other considerations to take into account. Labels the program as controversial, again out of context. Asserts that the rehabilitation of criminals is not a moral issue. Again, this is the reasoning we need to target, that these facts don't lead to this conclusion. Relies on evidence drawn from a sample that there is a reason to believe is unrepresentative. Okay, so what it says is, the people we chose on whom to perform those surgeries, that sample of people is not representative. Why? Because the surgery was performed on people who already behave well, so they are more likely to behave well going out. Okay, so their behavior or their likelihood to commit crime after moving out is already lesser. They are already behaving well. So it might not be because of the surgery that they're behaving or that they're committing lesser crimes. Any which way they would have committed lesser crimes. So this is the reasoning in the flaw in the reasoning. Tiger beetles are such fast runners that they can capture virtually any non-flying insect. However, when running toward an insect, the tiger beetle will intermittently stop and then a moment later resume its attack. Perhaps the beetle cannot maintain their pace. So the first hypothesis is that they need rest, okay, and they need to stop intermittently. So that's your first hypothesis. But an alternative hypothesis is that while running, tiger beetles are unable to adequately process the resulting rapidly changing visual information and so quickly go blind. The second hypothesis is they go blind at high speeds, so they need to stop. That is the second hypothesis. So we need an option that will support one of the hypotheses and undermine the other one. Okay. First option, when a prey insect is moved directly toward a beetle that has been chasing it, the beetle immediately stops. That means the prey insect turns back and moves towards the beetle. The beetle is able to see it, that's why it stops immediately. That means visually it's not going blind, it weakens the second hypothesis and runs away without its usual intermittent stopping. That means it doesn't need rest, it weakens the first one also. Out. In pursuing a swerving insect, swerving means, let's say, not moving in a straight line, zigzag motion. The beetle alters its course while running, so it responds to the visual changing, so it doesn't go blind, and its pauses become more frequent as the chase progresses. So why would the pauses become more intermittent? It might be because it gets more tired and it needs a rest more frequently. So it actually supports the first. That's your answer. Third, in pursuing a moving insect, the beetle usually responds immediately to the changes in the insect direction. So it's not going blind. And it pauses equally frequently whether the chase is up or down the incline. So, going up the incline, anybody would need or anybody would get tired more. So, the rest required should be more frequent. Okay, so the stops should be more frequent going up the incline, but it's not equal. It's not more. It's equal. It doesn't matter whether the chase is up or down the incline. So, The stop is not because it's tired and it needs rest. It could be some other reason. So it weakens the first one also out. If when a beetle pauses, it has not gained on the insect it's pursuing, the beetle generally ends its pursuit. And if you see above all, it doesn't tell me anything whether if it keeps running, would it need rest or would it not need rest? That's any which way out. The faster a beetle pursues an insect fleeing directly away from it, the more frequently the beetle stops. So in fifth, it supports the first one, but it doesn't say anything about the second one. Okay, it should have weakened the second one to be the answer. This is also out.